Hello and welcome everybody to this fireside chat. Your Salesforce data, your responsibility, best practices for data protection. Today's exciting webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Mackenzie Puddesy with Actual Tech Media, and I am excited to be your moderator for this conversation today because we all know how difficult it can be as a Salesforce admin to secure, maintain compliance, and ensure the availability of your organization's critical data. Keeping this as a priority alongside managing user requests and permissions can be a struggle. However, protecting Salesforce data shouldn't be time-consuming or complicated. Today's experts from Rubrik will outline some common challenges admins face in safeguarding Salesforce data, including accidental deletions, cyber threats, and compliance audits. Then they'll provide solutions and best practices to secure and simplify your data protection. Why is this so important? Well, believe it or not, 49% of Salesforce data loss stems from human error, leading to operational disruption and revenue loss. Additionally, 56% of organizations need over a day to recover 100% of records, and in this downtime costs an estimated $300,000 per hour, impacting business systems like enterprise resource planning. Likely that is why you're here today, to ensure this doesn't happen at your organization and that your Salesforce admin or admins can focus their efforts on what they do best. This is going to be such a cool conversation, and I cannot wait to get started. So let's zip through the housekeeping and get things on our way. First, I want to draw your attention to the questions section of your webinar console. This is the best place to get involved, get interactive, and post all your insightful questions, comments, feedback, and ideas. We do want to hear from you, so why don't you quickly find that questions tab now and start up by saying hi, hello, hola, aloha, bonjour, or whatever greeting resonates with you today, and give a little virtual wave to the community out there with you. As a quick side note, that window is also the best place to reach out and let us know if you have any technical issues during the session. Knock on wood, of course, that does not happen. However, don't forget that a browser refresh should get rid of the usual tech gremlins and be able to fix any issues with slides, video, or audio. But again, if not, just shoot a message in that questions tab and the Actual Tech Media crew, and I will be here to help. And the last thing I want to point out on your audience console is the handouts tab. So nestled in the same window as your questions, you can go check out the awesome links to the handouts. You've got an overview on best practices guide, rubric for Salesforce data protection. It's just a quick 2-pager PDF looking at what we're going to talk about today, a great overview to have. There's also a Salesforce data protection overview with videos and a link to demo the solution. And then finally, there's a link to an ebook titled 75% of Organizations Suffer Salesforce Data Loss. Are you prepared? So again, lots of great follow-ups, lots of great ways to share information and get a good overview of what we're going to talk about today on this fireside chat. And if all that information wasn't enough of a sweet giveaway, we also have a $250 Amazon gift card as a prize drawing at the end of our webinar. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions, also found in the handouts tab there as well. Okay, well, that is it for our housekeeping. So I think we are about ready to get started with our speakers here. And today we have two amazing subject matter experts here to take a deep dive into Salesforce data protection. I'm excited to introduce you all to Stacy Poon, who is the staff product manager over at Rubrik, and Derek Moorfield, who is the Senior IT Manager of Marketing and Channel Ops at Rubrik. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to today's speakers, who will give a brief overview of themselves and then get into today's discussion. Stacy, you're going to be up first. So Stacy, take it away. The floor is yours.
All right, so let's get started. So let me just give a little bit further introduction of myself. So again, my name is Stacy Poon. I am on the product team here at Rubrik. I've been with Rubrik for about almost 3 years, and my area of focus is SaaS data protection. Specifically lately, it's been all about Salesforce. So that's what we are going to be talking deeply about today. And with me today, I have my colleague, Derek. Derek, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Derek Moorfield. I'm an IT senior manager here at Rubrik. I've been here at Rubrik for going on 5 years, and I am the leader of the marketing and channel IT teams here at Rubrik. We manage the Salesforce instance along with many other applications that connect into the Salesforce ecosystem. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Before we get into some of our table topics, so that's what we're going to kind of have our conversation here today. Derek, are you able to tell us a little bit more about what your role is as a Salesforce leader here at Rubrik in terms of role, responsibilities, or even key initiatives in your realm of things?
Yeah, happily. So our Salesforce team is primarily responsible for helping to scale the Rubrik business. We do that by enhancing our current business systems to solve business challenges. We automate routine processes to make us more operationally efficient, and we create various systems that capture our valuable business data for our decision makers. We're also the subject matter experts to help assist any data team members or maybe new members, new business members that have joined that want to understand more about Rubrik's critical business data.
Great. You mentioned data a bit, and I'm actually kind of glad you did, because that's where we're actually going to talk a bit more about it. So obviously here at Rubrik, we care about securing data. And when we looked at Salesforce, there's a lot of things that we need to be thinking about and putting on a mindset when it comes to data protection. There's a stat or this statement I do want to share with you, Derek, and it's all around actually how data is lost sometimes when it comes to Salesforce. And actually, the stat you see here of 55% of users have experienced data loss, with the most frequent occurrence being 33% due to human error and 11% due to integration issues. And actually, these stats came about when we were actually at Dreamforce not so long ago, where we actually surveyed customers who attended that conference. And this is actually what we found. And I just wanted to kind of like see from you, Derek, like, how does this even happen? How does data loss happen when it comes to Salesforce? And do you see these two key data loss occurrences being maybe the most frequent?
Yeah, look, I'm nodding my head because this is a very real challenge that any Salesforce team is going to go through, at some point within their Salesforce career. Um, Salesforce is a really complicated system. It has a very complex permission structure, and so we can go more in depth in this today. But I can see three main areas where we see this kind of data loss could occur. One example is that you might just have users that are deleting your business records. Maybe they have over permissioned users and they have the ability to delete that data. They think the data is not relevant and they go in and delete that record themselves. We've also unfortunately pushed to production some automations that end up creating domino effect, chain reactions. Typically, this is one field update triggers multiple field updates through things like our workflow rules, our process builders, or just like Apex code automations. And that downstream impact creates other fields to also be modified at that same time. So some unintended automation consequences. And the third piece here is we have some users who have intentionally changed data, maybe because they thought it was, a corrected form of data. They went in, they thought they knew the right answer, they corrected that record. However, maybe that after further review wasn't correct in their understanding. And so we need to go back in time and figure out when that change occurred and reset that data.
Mm-hmm.
On the integration front, integrations can push data from one source to another. Maybe it's data that has come from your data warehouse. Maybe it's data that's come from a vendor system. But if any of that data is bugged in any way, it can ultimately lead to some kind of data corruption or data loss. And oftentimes that's actually one of the most difficult to work through because it's silent in the background. I would also note that integration users are typically highly permissioned users, just meaning that they have access to many objects and many fields, especially if you use maybe one user that's a global integration user. It can have access to do pretty severe things with in your environment. So yeah, those are very real things today.
I see. So it sounds like RBAC is critical to make sure that that's set up as best as you can in Salesforce to try to prevent that. But it still sounds like still things can happen. You need something to go back in time to help
Yeah,
you.
RBAC is really, really challenging within Salesforce. For many teams, Sarbanes-Oxley is a project that comes to mind where you get really, really tight with your RBAC controls. But some businesses are in different stages of their RBAC journey. Really, really solid RBAC controls are really difficult to maintain. And without like a pressing need, some companies might not necessarily have them fully implemented quite yet. But again, Salesforce has a really complicated permission structure. You can get permissions through the profile, through permission set groups, sharing settings, object settings. And this complex structure means there is not this like one size fits all ability to give object access. And oftentimes you can lead to over permissioning of users.
And then one of the points you also made was having the ability to kind of roll back in time. You still kind of need that just in case. But then that brings up, okay, then maybe you probably do need some backup and recovery tool, data protection tool, or something in place so that you can recover. So let's talk a little bit, a bit more about backup and recovery. So one of the things what we found talking to customers, doing a lot of market research around Salesforce is the challenges actually just backing up Salesforce data manually. And the top three that kind of bubbled up, what we saw is number one, it is extremely time consuming and resource intensive just to back up data. We're not even talking about research, just backing it up. The second one being that you also have to ensure that when you're backing up your Salesforce org, that it has data completeness and integrity. You can't just, pick pieces. You kind of all have to keep things like all intact because of the relationships and whatnot. And the third being that when you think about, you need to start backing up your data, you're creating copies, right? But then now it's thinking about, well, now what do I do with this backup data set? Is it secure? Can you elaborate a bit more on these 3 points?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it definitely is time consuming and resource intensive to do backups. When I think about the options that someone typically has to back up their environment, one of the most obvious ones is the ability to back up your entire Salesforce org into a CSV file every 30 days. That is, of course, one option, but that is point in time, meaning that at the point in time when you download that data, you're not updating with the daily updates that occur within your environment. Taking backups could also be for specific objects at specific points in time. For example, if you're rolling out an update to your opportunity object, you might take a backup of your entire opportunity table, and that might just be a single object that you need to download the entire table for. Backups typically have some limitations. So there are some options around like field history tracking, for example. You might use field history tracking to determine when a specific type of data corruption occurred, or maybe what the source of truth was in that backup. But field history tracking is only available for 20 fields on your object and is limited in how long field history tracking will be stored within your system. You also could have backups that occur within maybe a data lake. So if a data lake was to take periodic snapshots of your data, you might do that for core objects, but you might not necessarily do that for every single object. The point here, though, is that the ability for someone to take a backup of their data is oftentimes subject to the the person who is ultimately deploying the code. Prior to deploying that code, they needed to take that backup. And so you're really putting it on your Salesforce admin to make sure that they're doing the right due diligence. And adding one more thing to the plate of many, many things that they're already doing along with their day job is just more risk. In terms of your data completeness and integrity, in the same instance where I talked about an update that might be occurring to the opportunity object, you also need to think about what are the other associated objects that the opportunity touches. For example, you might want to also take a backup of account or contact or another child or parent object that you've used depending on the customization within your environment. Taking a backup of all of those different environments or all those different objects is a time-consuming thing. And you want to make sure that at the point in time where you're backing up, you've got all of those backups done, backed up at the same time. Okay. If you have a historical object where maybe you have metadata that has changed, for example, maybe in a backup of yours, you used to accept certain pick list values on a field within your object. Now maybe you don't accept those pick list values. It would be important to make sure that when you are backing up that data, you back it up with the correct metadata also associated with it. Keep in mind things like validation rules or metadata field filter values. These are all really important to be bringing in as you back up data. The third point here around security is really important. It kind of leads to the number one. Let's assume that you have taken a backup of your data in any of the forms that are available, right? Manual CSV export, maybe you take a manual object backup. Well, those files are likely going to be uploaded in some kind of cloud storage device. Maybe it's, Google or Box or OneDrive, any choice, right? But it misses a key thing is that that's all of your Salesforce data that is living in some SkyDrive and that is subject to the RBAC controls that are within that SkyDrive. And a user that gets access to that set of data has access to an incredible amount, of your business's data, and that's definitely a risk that we would advise against.
Yeah, so it sounds like you got to go figure out now how another problem then, like, yeah, sure, you got your backups, but now another problem you have to go figure out is just all the security that you need for this. So one, like you mentioned, is like RBAC, who has access, who can even touch wherever I stored this copy. Maybe another one could be like encryption. So it's figuring out many more things you need to do, I guess, manually. Is there maybe one other challenge that you can think of that you see is, not listed here that you would kind of think it's worth noting?
Yeah, Stacy, one thought that I think is worth noting is around encryption. So when we think about the data that we export as part of our normal, every 30-day export of data, maybe you take a manual backup, maybe you bring that, certain data from your data lake environment, any of those instances of backing up data. You also need to be thinking about how that data has been encrypted and what kind of sensitive data may reside within it. Are you containing PII? Are you containing any HIPAA type of data, social security numbers? Your data sensitivity, any Salesforce admin will understand their sensitivity of their data, but it's even more important, the more sensitive your data, that data gets encrypted and placed within the right environment.
Okay. See? All right. So now let's actually switch gears now to talking a bit more about restores, right? And focus on the challenges there. So again, speaking to many customers, looking at what problems start to bubble up primarily when it comes all around restoring Salesforce data. And what we've discovered, so the first one being is maintaining data relationships and integrity is hard. It is very difficult and very hard to do. So that's actually I would say one of the top challenges we heard of when customers start talking about when they need to go restore Salesforce data. The second piece being when it comes to metadata, sync and handling, right? So restoring data is great, but you also need to recognize and understand how to handle metadata at the same time to, again, make sure you have data integrity. And the third being is when customers started talking about when they lost data and what they need to go, what's actually one of the first things they need to do when they need to restore. It's all about figuring out this concept of blast radius, understanding that impact, right? And then understanding what other kind of records got impacted. And then also on top of this, just this investigation process does even take a while to do as well. Are you able to, again, elaborate on these three areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you had pointed out, maintaining data relationships and their integrity is super, super important. I'm glad it's the top one on this list. Look, many objects have Salesforce is a web of interconnected objects that all have different levels of parent and child type relationships. When I think about some objects, such as the opportunity object, it might have 20, 30, 50 different relationships to other objects. And whenever we're trying to restore an object, a record that, a corruption that occurred on a highly trafficked object, we have to think about whether we also need to restore the data on the associated other objects. Are you going to restore all of them? Maybe, but that might be a lot of records that you need to restore, a lot of different files that you need to create. More likely, you're probably going to figure out the most important ones, the business critical ones, and then only restore those ones, leading to potentially not a full data recovery. Of course, you also have to think about master detail relationships. Let's say a record was deleted that has a master detail relationship to many other child records. Well, you need to also think about restoring the parents first and then the children. And so understanding how the relationships work within Salesforce is important when you're going to be restoring any of these records together. Metadata is also an important piece. So when we think about restoring data, data has to have a home somewhere. Especially as I restore records that are potentially farther back in the past, the metadata that occurred on those records might be different than what you have today in your environment. For example, maybe you've dropped certain fields from your table, or maybe you have included different filter values within your field, or filter conditions within your object's field, or maybe it's pick list values. But making sure that when we restore back into an environment that has an applicable home for our data, super, super important. I'm also really glad that you guys included this determination of the blast radius. Precisely figuring out when something occurred and how many users are impacted is oftentimes a very challenging task. I'll give you an example. Let's pretend that you find out that a specific sales user has deleted some critical business data. Well, that sales user likely inherits their permissions from from a global setting that controls many different users and their ability to have that permission. So if you find that one person has deleted business data, it is possible that you see other people also had that ability to do so, and you need to actually go back in time and figure out if other people had experienced the same problem. In addition, it's very difficult to find a source of truth. We talked about this in the pains of the original backup. Within the original backup, if you don't have a source of truth that is close to the point in time where you think the issue occurred, then finding where exactly is the closest point of time not only is time consuming, but also potentially inaccurate for you, right? you're dealing with only suboptimal situations at this point.
I see. So you want to get like as close to, as you can. Otherwise, if you're completely off at that point in time, it's the less the accuracy, I guess.
Yeah. So if my latest backup data is from 1 month ago, maybe it's 29 days ago, then and I need to restore a record from back then, I've lost a lot of time uh, for other critical business things to have happened.
Mhm.
And if that's your only option, then that's a huge data loss. This is why it's really important for people to be thinking about, daily or weekly backups of their data, so that if they are going to have a corruption that occurs, you got to ask yourself, what is the maximum amount of time that I would allow for this record for me to recover from?
And I'm going to ask you the same question I did when it came to backups. Is there one more challenge you see that's worth to mention?
Yeah, I got a thought because it came up just recently, but it's really, really important that we restore to a sandbox first when we restore all of our Salesforce data. It sounds kind of self-explanatory, but your Salesforce, one, restoring to a sandbox will help you understand whether maybe you have emails that trigger or validation rules that block certain records from loading properly, or maybe you kick off any of your automations, your Apex triggers, your workflows, your flows, process builders, et cetera, right? Any of your automation sources. It's really important that you are loading into the sandbox environment first to understand if your load one will be successful, but two, are there any other downstream implications? Now, loading into sandbox also takes more time, right? If I have 5 different objects that I need to load within my restore, well, I need to load those 5 objects the first time, in the sandbox environment, and then I need to do that again in production. And so it just duplicates your time, and it's something that needs to be considered.
So really the reason why you're thinking of, hey, maybe another recommendation is to first restore to sandbox. But really the challenge is you're actually really testing a little bit more of, hey, understanding, what, workflows, automations, validation rules, maybe you need to disable. Otherwise it could result in a restore failure, maybe.
Yeah,
And get a little bit more kind of confident, right? And that a little bit more validation is needed before you actually want to restore to production.
yeah, best case, again, this depends on your environment, but some environments are able to temporarily disable validation rules, Apex triggers. Basically, I'll just classify all of your automations. Maybe you do it like really late in the evening when you think nobody's really using the system. That's one possible way that you can prevent this from happening. But you just have to be aware that your Salesforce instance is always on, which means it's always listening for the things that you've programmed it to do. And if you have an automation or an email, that's something that we're really, really hyper concerned about, is making sure that we're not having unintended emails getting sent out for the data that is changing within our system.
Okay. And then I'm just curious, like while you're testing for some of these, like, automation, like knowing what to disable, whatever, doing it manually, maybe understanding all this other kind of metadata or nuances that you need to disable, turn on, off, do you see that as time consuming and a challenge as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, in really sophisticated environments, you might need to have a code change that occurs, which means you need to include your developer in that code change. Maybe they need to run a deployment through your, dev, QA, UAT production. So it could be really time consuming. If you have a little bit smaller of an environment, maybe you can manually trigger, deactivate certain declarative automations that you have. I'm thinking in that case about like a process builder that maybe you deactivate, or a workflow that you deactivate, or maybe you have a global setting that everything points to that you can deactivate to turn everything off. It's one option, right? And I will just caution that everyone should think about their own environment before necessarily taking that action, because depending on when you do it within your business cycle, you might have actually critical operations that require that to be turned on.
All right. So now I actually want to kind of circle back to some of the challenges we discussed and then kind of share a little bit about now how we here at Rubrik can help address some of those challenges. So the first set being backup. So like we just talked about a few minutes ago, the first backup challenge is, hey, it's time consuming, it's resource intensive. So with Rubrik, what we're able to provide is you no longer have to do this manually, right? Everything is all automated. It's almost like a set it and forget it, and you get backups every 12 or 24 hours. The second challenge, what we talked about was around making sure that there's data completeness and integrity, and just making sure of that is actually a challenge in itself. And then so for Rubrik, what we're able to actually do is provide that comprehensive coverage that customers need when it comes to protecting Salesforce data on Salesforce's core platform, right? And we protect not just data, but metadata as well, because metadata is as critical. And the third area we talked about was definitely there's challenges around just figuring out how to secure backup data. So with Rubrik, when you kind of use our solution, right, we have that Rubrik Security Cloud going on where we take that copy of your production data and we store it in Rubrik Security Cloud where it's logically air-gapped, right? Data is stored with encryption, and we also have a tamper-proof design. Additionally, there is RBAC, so you can figure out how to really figure out what users need certain privileges, and then either to reduce that permission set or give the Salesforce admin everything they need so that they fully own the responsibility when it comes to backing up and restoring Salesforce data. So I guess with that said, Derek, I'm wondering, just curious, seeing what you see now here of the Rubrik capabilities we have now, what we're bringing to market with our product, which key, I guess, capabilities would you consider as like one of the top key core values, if you were to pick one?
Yeah, tough question asking me to pick one of these, but I think having a daily backup is probably one of the key things that any backup admin would love to have, right? That ability to not necessarily be required to take manual backups or historical backups is super important. I also love the security of the backup data. As I thought about more of taking my entire CRM database and loading into some cloud storage, that gives me a little bit of risk here that I'm not feeling too great about. And so having that confidence that it's in a logically air-gapped solution is also really good. So I cheated a little bit. I picked two.
Yeah, I was going to say just one, but that's fine. Okay, now again, let's now switch it up to when it comes to restores. So the challenges we talked about was first, and by far, was around maintaining data relationships and data integrity, and how that creates lots of pain, lots of challenge, lots of headaches to figure out how to do that. So with Rubrik, when you restore Salesforce data or Salesforce records, you're able to keep those relationships intact, right? Up to 10 levels deep. The second challenge we talked about was around metadata syncing and handling, right? So with Rubrik, we also, like I mentioned before, we protect metadata, but you're able to obviously restore that metadata as well and at a granular level. So for instance, hey, the ability to restore certain fields of an object or layouts of an object and many other types of metadata. It's quite comprehensive. And then, again, recognizing that when you go restore Salesforce data, you have to be very aware about kind of all the other stuff that Derek kind of you talked about, like, hey, I need to make sure that, how are like automations or workflows going to be handled? Is it going to be disabled? Because otherwise that can impact our restore. So we help customers kind of help optimize that restore efficiency by being aware about those things and auto disabling and some of those things. And the third piece around the restore challenges was we talked about how users it's very difficult to really kind of determine what that data loss is when that occurrence happened and that impact of it. So with Rubric, what we're able to do is help users exactly do that. Help them identify that what and when data deletions, modifications occurred so that they can really zone in quickly on that point in time so they can get, again, like what you mentioned, Eric, more accurate and picking the right point in time. The second piece is all around understanding that cascading impact. So our solution is able to detect and understand what is all the other related data that also needs to go get restored with the I guess the root objects that you selected. So what other data got impacted, either deleted or modified, that we also need to bring with that root object. And then I would say that last piece is around comparing to live environment. So what we help customers do is we help them have that sense of confidence and validation so that, again, they know of the point in time they selected, of the data that they selected for the restore, how is that different than their live environment? So they really understand what is going to happen, the differences, the data that they selected, how that's going to go impact production. So I guess with that said, again, out of these capabilities, Derek, which one do you see as that's the top one that I like the best?
Yeah, I think that your number 3 is going to help save your Salesforce admins the most amount of time. This is something that is really, really difficult to do manually, and to have some kind of automated solution around it is really important.
Yeah, and that's exactly kind of why we definitely see this as a key core value as well. Because, while we were doing all of our kind of research, talking to customers, again, every single time I asked a customer, just talk me through how you would go restore data. I never said first, go figure out the what and when, but how would you restore data? They pretty much almost all of them started with, I first need to go figure out and analyze, understand changes, what occurred. So I think that is really critical, kind of what you alluded to.
Absolutely.
Okay, so great. I guess before we leave, Derek, I think what I would like to do is, if you can actually share some words of wisdom for the folks that have attended our session, that really kind of just helps them and guides them when they think about restoring Salesforce data. How can they get to be the most accurate as possible and then restore with that data integrity that they need to? So I guess we'll turn it kind of over to you. What are some kind of key, I guess, tips?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have thought about this quite a bit. The first thing I would say is a must do is you have to find the time window for the error. So you have to figure out when that error occurred. Maybe you just recently, deployed an automation, or maybe you think that, you had a permission issue that occurred a long time ago. And depending on when you know that your error occurred, that is very informative as to when you think that you might need to select as a point in time to go back to. The second piece is to find the blast radius, which is essentially figuring out all of the different impacted objects, records, fields that you think are implicated as part of this error. The blast radius, or essentially how big your issue is, combined with the time window, could combine into either a really large problem or a really small problem. Based on that, we want to find the source of truth. The source of truth is going to be your highest confidence data that you have that was unaffected by the original corruption. In the case of maybe your CSV backups, this is where a point in time is sometimes a challenge, right? You want to try and make sure that your source of truth, I'd recommend a daily backup, but for some people who don't have necessarily the ability to do a daily backup, as close as possible to wherever you can see the clean copy of your data is the most important. Once you have both the source of truth, the blast radius, and your time window, now you're ready to prepare a data file that can help you load into the affected environment and fix your records. You're going to do that typically by creating an Excel file, create one tab per object that you need to load to, making sure that you have, let's say, the IDs and the corrected fields, as well as the corrected values that are associated with it. If you're needing to restore full records of data, then you'll need to also include any of the required fields that are important for that specific object. Again, if you have more than one object that you're loading to, you're going to want to create one file or one tab per object. Next, you're going to load into Sandbox. So I talked about before, we never want to load directly into a production environment. Loading into Sandbox helps you figure out if there's any accidental email automations that would take place, or maybe other field level automations, such as Apex classes, your workflow rules, process builders, or flows. But loading into Sandbox is always a suggested option because it helps ensure your own confidence that the data that you're loading is the correct data. And finally, once everything feels good in your Sandbox environment, you're ready to load into production. Once again, you're loading one data load per object, and you're going to want to load that in the order in which the dependencies require. So that means your parent records are going to go first, followed by your children records. Overall, I know this is a really long and arduous process for a lot of Salesforce administrators. I'm with you guys. I've done this before, and it's not a fun process. But hopefully, if you can, put all of these steps together, you can be the hero in your day and really help solve a big business problem that's come your way. So I want to thank everyone for your time today.
Thanks. And one more thing after going through all this, and if you had a tool that can help you do all this even better.
Yeah, absolutely. If the Salesforce data protection product is there and you're able to back up your data on a 24-hour basis, you're able to quickly find your blast radius. You definitely know your source of truth. And I guess you don't have to necessarily prepare the data file because it's all within, a centralized interface. And as long as you have the ability to restore to Sandbox first and monitor those changes, I think this could be drastically reduced in your time. And now you're making a lot of impact without having to spend too much effort and go back to your other very important initiatives.
Right. Stacy, Derek, thank you so much for sharing your insights and knowledge. I really enjoyed this fireside chat style webinar today. And of course, I think the audience did as well. Now, if you are out there in the audience, Stacy and Derek are not sticking around for a live Q&A. So any of those questions that you put in, don't fret. They will be passed on and answered by the Rubrik team after today's webinar. And as Stacy mentioned, you guys can always reach out directly over LinkedIn and say hello there. Now, please be sure to check out the additional resources in the Handouts tab to continue your Rubrik and Salesforce journey. Again, the 3 handouts in there are the Overview on Best Practices Guide, Rubrik for Salesforce Data Protection, easy two-pager PDF that you definitely want to check out. Then there's the Salesforce Data Protection Overview with videos and a link to the demo. So if you want to get your hands on this solution and try it out for yourself, you can do that there. And then finally, there is a link to their ebook. This is titled 75% of Organizations Suffer Salesforce Data Loss. Are you prepared? Well, you know what? I'm sure that you want to be, so you definitely want to check that out. Okay, and before we wrap up, we have one more little bit of fun to add to an already awesome webinar. It is time for our prize giveaway. Quick reminder that you must be present at the live webinar today to win. And without further ado, today's winner of a $250 Amazon gift card is Naaman Jane from Texas. Big congratulations to you, Naaman. As always, we'll be in touch about claiming your prize after the webinar today. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubrik for making this webinar possible, and especially I want to thank our speakers who've given us so much to think about today. And I also want to thank all of you. Thank yous are in order for making today possible. I know it can be difficult to stop and lift our heads up from the day to day of it all, and planning how to implement the best practices in order to protect your Salesforce data with Rubrik is not always what you're going to prioritize. However, today you took that time, you prioritized this, and now you can take all that new learning and those tools and hopefully implement them at your organization and bring them back to your teams there. So again, thank you for making the mental space. I hope that you learned a lot today and that you guys had a lot of fun and that you're feeling empowered and ready to, again, take those next steps. I know I had a lot of fun today, and I hope that you will all be back on another webinar again soon. And until then, I am wishing you an absolutely magical rest of your day. Take care, everybody.